Now, we begin with breaking news and the U.S. announcing a troop withdrawal from Northern Syria. The Pentagon says up to 1,000 soldiers will be pulling out as Turkish troops and their Syrian allies continue their offensive to push into Kurdish-controlled towns. In the latest advance, those forces say they've captured Saluk. The town is important. It'll ensure supply routes from Turkey as the operation progresses. Sunday has seen heavy bombardments on other towns near the border. Ankara says forces have now entered Tal Abyad, and they say they've taken control of Rosiland. The fighting is forcing more civilians from their homes, though. The United Nations says 130,000 people have been displaced. In a moment, we'll cross over live to Zaina Khudr on the Turkey-Syria border. But first, to Rosiland Jordan in Washington, D.C. Rosiland, what more can you tell us about this line on a U.S. withdrawal from Syria?
Well, according to the Defense Secretary Mike Esper, who is appearing on U.S. television this Sunday morning, he has said that he consulted with U.S. President Donald Trump on Saturday evening, and after taking a look at the situation on the ground, a decision was made that these forces would have to be moved out of northeastern Syria. Here's more of what Mike Esper, the U.S. Defense Secretary, had to say.
We believe that the Turks now intend to go further south than originally expected and to go both west and east, which would increase their zone from beyond a 30-kilometer depth and nearly 440 kilometers wide. At the same time, we've learned in the last 24 hours that it looks like the SDF is cutting a deal with the Syrians and Russians.
Yeah, we should say SDF, those are the Kurdish forces, the Syrian Democracy Forces.
Defense forces, that's right. They're cutting a deal, and now what we're facing is U.S. forces in trapped between a Syrian-Russian army moving north to take on the Turkish army that is moving south. It puts us in a terrible position, and the protection and safety of our service members comes first to me. I spoke with the national security team yesterday. We all talked on the phone. I talked to the president, and he is concerned. And so last night he directed that we begin a deliberate withdrawal of U.S. forces from the northern part of Syria.
Now, of course, Sammy, the big part of Mike Esper's announcement, which was already getting him criticized to his face on the Sunday public affairs shows, was the idea that, yes, it's important to protect U.S. forces from being caught in the crossfire, as it were. But this is also a situation where, because U.S. forces are pulling out, the Syrian defense forces are now having to build a security alliance, perhaps with both Syria and with Russia. And that the defense secretary made a point of saying, well, yes, they were very important in terms of fighting ISIL, but we weren't in northern Syria to protect the Kurds. That may get him even more criticism, and by extension, more criticism for the U.S. administration in the decision to pull U.S. forces back from northeastern Syria.
All right, Rosiland Jordan there. Thanks so much. Let's take this now to Zaina Khudr. She's on the border of Turkey and Syria, and we're hearing Turkey making new gains. Tell us how that's shaping up on the ground, Zaina.
Well, really fast-moving developments. The map of northeastern Syria is changing. In just the past few hours, northeast Syria was under the control of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces as well as U.S. soldiers. In the past hour or so, the SDF has been losing ground. They have a few fighters who are holding up in Rosiland and in other areas. But the border, 120-kilometer stretch of the border line is practically cleared from the SDF. Of course, the Syrian Kurdish armed group, the YPG, forms the backbone of this group. So 120 kilometers from Rosiland to Tal Abyad. Turkish-led forces are also pushing south. They have pushed 30 kilometers on a number of fronts. The Turkish Defense Ministry saying that they've reached the strategic highway, the M4 highway, that they're in control of that highway. So the 30-kilometer pocket of territory that the Turkish military planned to initially capture in this operation seems to be almost a success. Now we are hearing that the U.S. forces are leaving northeast Syria altogether. They've withdrawn from Ain Issa, also on this 30-kilometer mark. We're getting reports that they're withdrawing from Manbij, which is to the west. So basically, they have really no presence in a lot of areas in the east of the Euphrates. So the question now is what happens next? President Erdogan, in his speech, it was an unscheduled speech, he said, our goal is to push 30 to 35 kilometers deep into Syria. What he did not say is how long that borderline will be. Then we heard the U.S. Defense Secretary say we believe the Turks want 480 kilometers of that border. So many unanswered questions on what happens next. How is the territory going to be divided? Because if the Turks stop at 30 kilometers and the SDF remains in control of areas south of that, we have to also remember further south are the Russians and the Syrian government. A very complex picture on the ground. But what it seems is that at least there is an initial understanding for the 120 to 30 kilometer territory.
Right. If the US is pulling at least some of its forces out, how is that going to change the situation there?
Well, the US forces, they had a few hundred troops. But the very fact that they were there, this was territory under their control. In one way or the other, they were giving protection to the SDF and by extension, the YPG. This is a very strategic corner of Syria. It is where oil fields are located. It is the breadbasket of Syria. More than one player wants it. There's also critical supply routes that link Iraq with Syria. So a very strategic territory that all sides want. Turkey says it needs to push the YPG from the border for national security concerns. It wants refugees to return. The Damascus government, for example, wants the territory to return under its sovereignty. Iran offering to negotiate between the Turks and Damascus in order to revive an old deal, the Adana agreement, to provide security to Turkey at the border. So with the U.S. withdrawing, it no longer is a player. And this area is up for grabs from more than one player in this conflict. And caught in the middle of all this is hundreds of thousands of people who are now scared, not knowing who their new rulers will be.
All right, Zaina Khudr there, thanks so much.